Hello and welcome to part 2 of an introduction to making Mare Nostrum a hollow jest. Right, let's hope this works, and let's hope this is more, how do I put this? This is a good one, hopefully. Right then, so, to begin, I'm back. Hopefully, if you've watched part 1, you'll know what this is all about. I've already done the submarine side. As it got to 50 minutes, I decided to stop it and turn it into a two-parter because, frankly, I was talking too much. Hopefully, this doesn't go on for quite such a long time. Who knows? It might do. I might have to pause it in the middle to finish the upload of part 1 and make sure that's all working on YouTube, but we'll see what happens. That's uploading in the background while I record this. Oh, seriously, it's fun. Bilge pumps, wahey! Always a lot of fun. And I've already been talking about what today we've been recording. We're recording the joint with Michael Clapp, and the Michael Clapp in a sort of not so much an interview because he joined a discussion and it was like it was just amazing. It was having it was the three of us were sitting there going, we were really worried if it was going to change the dynamic, or this is one of the reasons why we were as careful as we were about who was going to be our guest, who was going to be our first guest, finding out and working it all out. And frankly, we couldn't have had a better first guest if we'd, gone with, made one artificially. It was just so much fun. He was really, really cool. And frankly, we couldn't have had a better one, as I said. Now, I'm using the some announcements middle page as my sort of divider. And as I said earlier, there are going to be some deep dives coming out. They're going to be covering when I'm a-wandering. And they're hopefully going to be enjoyable. The idea is they're going to be like the introduction videos, but without a live, theoretically. And I say theoretically because, as I've said, the one which gets the most likes when I get back will get a live. That's the thing. It's going to be whichever ones I publish, whichever one gets the most likes, we'll get a live when I get back. I don't know how long I'm going to be away from. I'm not even sure if I'm going to be allowed to go away. So I could be doing all this preparation. We could go on lockdown again in the country, and I could be still still at home. I wouldn't like to say stuck because I love my home and I love my family. But it would be nice to see my girlfriend. We haven't been in the same place since February. We're expecting to meet up again in March for my birthday, and it just didn't happen for some reason. Can't think why. So that's been rather a long time. That's like 5 months of video calls. They're not as good. They're good, but they're not as good. And so that's all going on. And there are going to be some book review ones, as in the 4 random books. The idea being I pick any 4 books from my book collection, which I think, if you read them together, they make an interesting idea, an interesting position. So they could be books I've covered before in some of the things. They could be books which are completely new to you, because I haven't mentioned them before. But they are sets. They're going to be 4 random books. The idea is, so I pick I pick one book at random from a collection, and I pick 3 more which I think go with it and talk about. So so Brew Ships is going to have sort of, to an extent, not Brew Ships, but a bit of a fill-in, and the normal videos are, because I really, you have all been so wonderful. You're all so nice. YouTube is such a wonderful experience. I'm going to keep it going, but I was really worrying, what will I do when I go traveling to archives, when I possibly go away on a teaching trip, or I go away with my family to places which, frankly, don't have as good internet access. What am I going to do? And I ended up deciding, right, well, what I'll do is I'll take some of the video stuff which works, the introductions, and I'll play with that use that as a basis of my idea. So the introductions will turn into deep dives, and the one which is most liked will be alive. And a sort of introduction part of the Brew Ships. I can't do the Q&A pre-recorded. Because that'd be a bit cruel. But I'm going to work out something on that one. Anyway. See. So, the Mediterranean Theatre in World War II. And I'm going to disappear for a second while I fill this in. You have Gibraltar in the west. Then Malta. And then Alexandria and Cyprus. Now, here's the thing. The loss of Crete is actually a big issue for the Allies when it comes to getting stuff to Alexandria. And also, in that way, if you manage to maintain control of Crete, you could have, in many ways, effectively cut off the eastern Mediterranean to many of the attacks which could be mounted. After all, with the control of Cyprus, Alexandria and Crete, that would create a triangle that your fleet could operate in with a likelihood of having land-based air defence as well as its own organic air power from whichever carrier they had attached there. And that is why Crete matters, and that's why you try to defend Crete. But also, as you can see, Malta is sitting there in the middle of the Italian and German North African supply lines. Just sitting there, going, howdy, I am here. So you often have to wonder whether the Germans would have been more sensible heading for Malta than they were for Crete. Now, the problem is, of course, they have already got their forces already in Greece, which is a nice logical progression to going to Crete. And theoretically, if you have enough troops and are having success in North Africa, the troops from Crete and the troops from North Africa can meet up in Egypt. And then, of course, Malta ceases to matter. But it's not really the best idea in that scenario. And also, here's the other thing. Once you have got control of Crete, then why not use the Regia Marina to help get control of Malta? Now, I know they have land-based guns and the sea batteries and all these sort of things, which are a major risk to you. But if you've got enough bombers, and if you're willing to do it, you could cause a lot of damage before the battleships turn up. And then the battleships could pummel things very effectively, considering how many, as we all know from Drax videos, how many different range-finding systems they carried on their ships. Surely they could have got the range fairly quickly and accurately on anything firing at them and knocked it out. But they didn't. So Malta got to stay. Which was good for Malta. Bad for everyone else. But that is the Mediterranean. Also makes you realise, once the loss of France and with the loss of Crete, these are major issues for the Royal Navy. Because you have Gibraltar, then you have Malta, then you have all the bases. All the bases for the Royal Navy, in many ways, are the wrong end of the Mediterranean from their supply lines. Which is why the supplies either have to go all the way around Africa, or they have to be fought through the Mediterranean. And please, all thanks go to Gordon Smith, because his beautiful, beautiful maps I use so often. They really are useful, really are critical, and for someone who's as cartographically challenged as I when it comes to drawing maps, they are a godsend. It's either this, or I bribe, actually the best friend who I mentioned the other day, who's I'm standing in as man of honour for, in her wedding. It's all explained in the last Brew Ships. I think Brew Ships number 12. Who is actually a professional geographer. So, you know, my options are bribe her with chocolate or use Gordon Smith. And honestly, Gordon Smith is a lot cheaper because she charges a lot in chocolate. A lot. She's priced herself out of business, really. When it was a box of Maltesers, that was fine. And that's a box of black magic. That's expensive. Thank God she hasn't found a Ferrero Rocher. then, so here's Gibraltar. Gibraltar are mostly the S-class subs. So when we start talking about what's based in Gibraltar, usually 9 times out of 10 we're talking about the S-class of 8 Submarine Flotilla. Now, sometimes there are other boats, because guess what? There is a world war on. And sometimes they need to take the submarines where they can get them. And so that means sometimes you have completely different boats operating there. But usually, as a rule, the 8 Submarine Flotilla are composed of the S-class. And that's good. Remember what I said. These were the submarines which were supposed to be operating in the Mediterranean. But they have a lot of problems. They have the fact that it is quite so far from support, as an earlier map of the lovely Western Mediterranean highlights. And secondly, there is the fact there is quite such a heavy anti-submarine warfare program going on around Gibraltar to try and stop U-boats getting into the Mediterranean, or U-boats and Italian submarines getting out of the Mediterranean. Basically, the idea is, if you're in there, we want you to stay in there. If you're trying to get in there, we'd prefer you didn't. Which means there's a lot of booby traps put by both sides in this water, because you've got to remember the Italians are trying to stop the Allies getting into the Mediterranean, because that's the easy way of securing North Africa and the Mediterranean for themselves, is they can block the Allies. And the Germans are trying to just generally kill the Allies, because they're fighting a war with them, so it kind of makes sense. And the Allies are trying to stop both the Germans and Italians getting in and getting out of the Mediterranean. So that means there's a lot of very trigger-happy people doing anti-submarine warfare in the run-up to Gibraltar. So whilst I haven't found an instance of blue-on-blue in terms of sinkings that are known about, but remember, a lot of submarines are lost and we're not sure what happened to them, so they could have run afoul of our own minefields. Certainly, the effects on submarine deployments and how they had to be looked after and how they had to be deployed and the rules around were sort of restricted by this scenario. And that map comes from UboatNet. And that's a very cool map from UboatNet. I do like... I've managed to use both my 2 favourite sources of maps today and information online. UboatNet and my good friend Mr. Gordon. They are... Well, he's not my friend. I've never actually met him. I would love to meet him. Shake his hand and go, thank you for your maps over the years. They've been absolutely critical. But I haven't. But all I can say is thank you, and if you need maps, those are the ones to go to. They really do the good quality ones. Anyway, to Malta, the Uboat Wall. And before we get into this too much, I'm not gonna slag off this. It's coloured, yes, book. Frankly, it's like many Mediterranean World War II books. If it wasn't for a couple of amphibious operations, you would be excused for thinking that the Mediterranean was all about land war. Well, actually, it really wasn't. Now, remember, I gave you a figure of 2 million tons of shipping was sunk by the Allies. 10th Flotilla, based on Malta, accounted for in 2 years, that's between January 1941 and December 1942, 412,575 tons of Axis shipping. So that's, broadly speaking, as I said, about 20%. A little bit under, maybe. And they start off with all Uclass, pretty much. HMS Unbeaten, HMS Unholder, United, Upright, Una, Unseen, Unbending, Unbroken, Urge, Utmost, HMS P-38, HMS Ursula, ORP Sukhoi, and ORP Disnik of the Polish Navy. Both those vessels are U-class vessels which are transferred to the Polish Navy while they're being constructed. Let's have a look at these pictures in close-up. This is them in Balta. And it is absolutely amazing. And I want you to think about this. Actually, as you can see up there, there's HMS Oracle and HMS Thunderbolt in Malta in 1943. Yes, as I said, other submarines do turn up. Sometimes they're dropping a supply, sometimes they are filling in, because whilst 10th Flotilla never goes above 12 boats, and they do most of all, there are times when you just need a submarine. And thankfully, the Uclass are useful. So let's first off go with the evaluation of Uclass by Admiral of the Fleet, Viscount Cunningham. Now, helpfully, I put this down, and therefore I have lost page 434 in Sailor's Odyssey. But I can find 434, and hopefully that was the right book. No, it wasn't. I have gone to the wrong page number, because I've gone to, oh, that one, yeah. That would explain why I missed it. Which page was it then, if it wasn't 434? I do not know. Uclass, Uclass, Uclass. 400. And tribals are on 234. That's what happened. Right then. So, June was another great month for our submarines. The small U-class from Malta were continuing to take a steady toll on the enemy shipping on the Tripoli route, besides working off the coast of Sicily and Italy. The continual bombing of Malta, however, was giving them little rest in harbour, and to cheer them up a little, I made them a signal. The strain of the continuous and arduous duties you are being asked to carry out is fully appreciated, but your fine actions clearly indicate that their necessity is very apparent to you, and I am certain that you will carry it on with the same ready efficiency. Okay, that's not the most awe-inspiring of all things to be given assent, but it's rather nice. It's nicer than nothing, and frankly, you got to love it. You've got to love the fact that a commanding officer is prepared to send this to you. Is prepared to send all this and prepared to, do what he take his time to do so. And it's nice of him. It could be more inspiring, but it's nice of him. That's of course not my only book about the U-boats and about what they got up to in Malta. The most critical book is this one, and this is why I'm showing you this now. Periscope Patrol by John Frayne Turner. The saga of the Malta Force submarines and all the stuff they get up to. And I could read you from the book. It's awe-inspiring. It's amazing. It's a very cool book. But actually, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to read to you from the appendices. Now, this is a list of their submarines and their commanding officers, which form Malta's Force submarines and 10th Submarine Flotilla at the beginning. Upright, commanded by Lieutenant E.D. Norman, and then later Lieutenant J.S. Rafe. Utmost, Lieutenant Commander R.D. Cayley. Unique, Lieutenant A.F. Collett. Upholder, Lieutenant Commander M.D. Wanklin. VC and DSO. 2 bars posthumously. USC, Lieutenant P.R. Ward, and then Lieutenant G.P. Darling. Ursula, Lieutenant A.J. Mackenzie, then Lieutenant A.R. Heslett. Undaunted, Lieutenant J. Livesey. Unbeaten, Lieutenant E.A. Woodward. Union, Lieutenant R.F. Galloway. Urge, Lieutenant Commander E.B. Tompkinson. P-33, Lieutenant R.D. Waitway Wilkinson. P-32, Lieutenant D.A.B. Abdi. Sokol, Commander Kaniki, VM and DSO. P-34, Lieutenant P.R.H. Harrison. P-31, Lieutenant J.B. Deby Kershaw. Una, Lieutenant D.S.R. Martin. Then Lieutenant C.P. Norman. P-38, Lieutenant R.J. Hemingway. P-35, Lieutenant S.L.C. Maiden. P-36, Lieutenant H.N. Edmonds. P-39, Lieutenant N.M. Marriott, and the spare commanding officer was Lieutenant J.D. Martin, who I often wonder is a relative of DSR Martin. Or they could. Martin's a common enough name, but I couldn't when I read the book, I wasn't quite sure. Headquarters staff was a Captain G.W.G. Simpson, a Commander G. Tanner, Lieutenant Commander S.A. McGregor, Engineering, and Lieutenant Commander R. Giddings. And when I tell you what they did, well, let's be honest, the Captain gets a CBE, the Commander, Lieutenant Commanders, all three get OBs. So let's look at what I scored during the period covered by this book. And this book doesn't quite marry up with the figures I gave you earlier, because this book actually covers a shorter period than the period of the figures I gave you earlier. Upholder. 2 destroyers, 3 submarines, 3 transports, 10 supply ships, 2 tankers, 1 trawler. 21 vessels sunk, 128,353 tons sunk. Urge. 2 cruisers, 1 destroyer, 1 transport, 5 supply ships, 2 tankers. That's 11 ships sunk, 74,669 tons. Utmost, 1 transport, 6 supply ships. That's 7 ships sunk and 43,993 tons. Unbeaten. 2 submarines, 2 supply ships, 1 tanker, 1 collier, 2 schooners. That's 8 ships, 30,616 tons. Upright. 1 cruiser, 1 destroyer, 4 supply ships, 1 floating dock. That's 7 ships, and that's 23,408 tons. Unique. 1 armed merchant cruiser, 1 transport, 2 supply ships. That's 4 ships, and that's 20,382 tons. Una, 1 supply ship, 1 tanker, 1 schooner. That's 3 ships, 15,355 tons. Ursula, 2 supply ships. That's 2, of course, 14,640 tons. P-31, 1 cruiser, 1 supply ship. That's 2 ships again, 12,100 tons. Sokol, 1 destroyer, 2 supply ships, 1 schooner. That's 4 ships and 7,642 tons. Plus possibly should be added, but it was never confirmed. Well, there's a few submarines to these, including Sokol. They had a habit of popping up out of the water and going boom, 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 and then diving. P-33, 1 supply ship, 6,600 tons. P-35, 1 supply ship, 1 salvage tug. That's 2 ships for 4,471 tons. P-38, 1 supply ship, 4,170 tons. Union, 1 supply ship, 2,800 tons. And P-34, 1 submarine, 1,461 tons. For a grand total of 390,660 tons. Sunk. Less than 12 ships. Less than 12 ships. 12 boats. These submarine crews aren't as well remembered as they should be. 1 book. You think of the countless books written about submarines, about especially the Battle Atlantic and German submarines and what they get up to. I'm never one who likes to get and jump in the bandwagon of the idea that some people almost fetishize the German side of World War II and their study of it. But I am certainly coming round to the opinion that my colleagues who study British submarines are possibly, arguably, even more ignored than my colleagues and I who occasionally wander into destroyers and into Fleet Air Arm in the interwar period, because I think at least those destroyers and the Fleet Air Arm gets a mention when you're writing up the big books of the wars. The Royal Navy submarine forces don't get as much a mention. And why? My argument, especially in the case of Malta is seen as being under siege, and a lot of the histories write it like that. What's forgotten is that it was this great offensive forward post in the middle of the enemy supply lines. It was thanks to the submarines based there, it was thanks to the destroyers based there, it was thanks to the aircraft based there that Malta was consistently going on the offensive. They weren't in as much as they were under siege, they were laying siege to the supply lines of the Italians and of the German forces in North Africa. Without their laying siege, the fight on the land would have been that much more difficult. So when you read the books which are histories of the Mediterranean War, which forget what's going on, which treat Malta as a siege, which treated all the focus on the land battles, and forget these actions, forget these desperate little fights, these vicious little contests going on in the waves 24 hours a day, then they are doing a disservice not only to the actual events of the history, but to the readers. To the people who are studying it, the people who want to learn, because they are missing out on a crucial part of the picture. Maybe I just haven't found the right book yet. But I've got a fairly large number of them around me. There are some very good papers I've seen written, and there are some very good historians I have worked with, and who I know their books are excellent. There's Marcus Faulkner's Atlas of the Second World War, and that is a book I hope to very much bring to you at Brew Ships one day when I get a full-on hard copy. At the moment, he might have been very kind of a PDF, but leave that to one side. You know, these sort of things are critical. These books are expensive, though, and it's the books which aren't expensive seem to be, they deal in what's called, and I hate that phrase again, they say it's popular history. It's not necessarily popular history. All history can be popular if it's written right. What they're dealing with is the history which is most commonly known, which has been told through the easiest way it was told at the time, and has therefore become part of the myth. It's the stuff which you can tell in newspapers. It's the stuff you can talk about day in, day out. You can't talk about a submarine war regularly going on in sort of the papers. There's so many things going on, you can't discuss it. It's not going to be, and HMS Holber sunk a supply ship today. That's lovely, but that's hardly going to be news when you've got big battles going on land, and the fights going over your head, and the Battle of the Atlantic going on where you're losing so many ships a day. Yes, you're building more, but those are people's lives who are being lost in these things. You can see why it gets lost in the popular memory, in the national memory of the time as it's fought. But what you can't see why, and what I find more difficult, is when I find very recent historians, and I'm not going to name names because, it's not my policy to pan books or pan anyone. It's just the thing I've noticed, and if you read a book and you look at it, you'll see what I'm talking about when you see it, who also continue to forget that. Right. On to slightly happier ones. The big boats of the Alexandria Submarine Flotilla. And most of these boats come actually from, well, they come from the they come from the sort of the, in terms of the war, they come from the Far East. They're the Far East boats, and they're brought back because the war's going on. The Mediterranean starts the war with just 10 submarines. And frankly, this causes problems for them. This causes problems in that they need to be drawn in from elsewhere. And this is part of the weakening of the Far East. These submarines are the submarines best designed for the Far East, for part of the deterrence operation, because when you're deterring Japan, when you're doing this deterrence, you need to be able to do two things. You need to be able to threaten their supply lines so you can draw their ships off, and you also have to make them worried about bringing their ships to you without escorts, without supplies. So it sort of works the two ways. If you're doing an attack on their merchant ships, they have to start escorting their merchant ships. If they've got to escort their merchant ships to protect them from your cruisers, then they don't have as many escorts available to protect their battleships. So there's a limit that limits the number of operations they can do in terms of their amphibious and their attacks on Singapore. So the idea was, if you force them to have to pick, what will they pick? And either way, if they try not to pick, if they try to do both, then they'll have far weaker forces on both ways, in which case the submarines will have more chance of getting a big kill in when they're making an attack, and so forth. So these submarines are in like sort of, and again, it goes back to that quote, the quote from the lovely, irreducible Viscount Cunningham of Hind Hope. The larger T-class submarines working from Alexandria were also having great success in the Aegean and off Derna and Benghazi. Apart from destroying 2 submarines, 1 Italian, 1 French, they had sunk 8 supply ships or tankers and damaged 2 more. So great were the opportunities for submarines to inflict heavy losses on Axis shipping in the narrow waters and restricted routes in the Eastern Mediterranean that I asked the Admiralty to send me all that could be spared. They were sinking French submarines. We talk about Mers el-Kabir. It didn't stop that. They weren't sure who was in charge of a French submarine. If they saw it, they took it out. It was in the war zone. Their presumption was it was either under command of a pro-German French officer or was under German or maybe Italian command. So they took it out. It's the war that's going on. Truant and Osiris. Good ships. Good boats. Summary. Was it worth it? The submarine war in the Mediterranean was dirty and vicious. I've said this several times, and I'll say it again. Sorry. Just making the part 1 go live. That'll give you an idea of how quickly this is being recorded and going up. So, submarine war in the Mediterranean was dirty and vicious. It was. It was always going to be. It was a close-in fight. It wasn't the scenario which was going to be very nice, very gentlemanly. It wasn't going to be like the Atlantic or the Pacific, where the submarines had huge scouting ranges, areas they could go into. No, it was going to be close. It was always going to be ambush, and whoever managed to if your opponent managed to survive, the odds are you weren't going to. But it doesn't get nearly enough coverage. And I think part of this is because of the scenario that the Battle of the Atlantic was quite so scary for the British, quite so worrying for the British, that actually there is a scenario which develops where they do not like admitting that, frankly, at one part of the Irish Sea, they were going massively far more aggressive than the Germans or the Italians ever managed in many ways in the Battle of Atlantic. Yes, there are a few aces, but if you look at the level of achieved, especially by the 10th Flotilla in Malta, what that small group of submarines are achieving in comparison to what the far larger number of submarines are achieving in the Battle of Atlantic, it's very, very good. You know, as I've got here written here, emphasizes between January 1941 and December 1942, 10th Flotilla alone, despite never numbering more than 12 submarines and usually less, sank 412,575 tons of Axis shipping. Now, I actually think sometimes that figure might be a little underdone, mainly because it's going by the tonnage of the ships, and I'm wondering if they were slightly overloaded. Plus, of course, there's the fact that Italians did have a habit of, in terms of ships, of misrepresenting quite how much they weighed. But, c'est la vie. On that front. In the same period, the Axis submarines sunk 8.4 to 8.5 million tons in the Battle of Atlantic, a period which includes the happy time. Think about this. That is far, far more submarines than the Royal Navy was ever able to put into Malta. That is far, far more tonnage passing through than was ever passing across the Mediterranean. Yes, it was terrible losses, but this is the time when the British the Americans come into the war. You have all sorts of scenarios going on here. This is a period when, frankly, if you listen to some of the traditional stuff that gets spoken about submarine warfare in World War II, you would be expecting, the Germans to be outperforming many, many times than a simple ratio of numbers. Whereas if you start, dividing average tonnage sunk by number of submarines deployed, the U-class in Malta start to look incredibly good. The T-class and the other vessels in Alexandria also start to look quite good. And the S-class, for all their many, many losses, start to look very, very good. And that's the point, really. The Mediterranean is forgotten as a submarine war, but it was a submarine war. The Mediterranean is forgotten in some respects because of the battles of the North African campaign, the colossal amphibious operations mounted, which were Torch and Husky, these huge operations, Avalanche, all these things are very, very big, very, very important operations. And without them, the war does not turn out the way it does. But you have to always think that perhaps behind the headlines there is a whole lot of stuff happening which will never make the headlines, makes the headlines possible. And the whole of the North African campaign, I would argue the land war would not have gone as well as it did if 10th Flotilla had not been sitting astride the lines and not been doing what it was doing. And I don't think that's a controversial claim to make. Honestly, when you look at the stats, I don't see how that would be a controversial claim to make, especially not when you combine their actions with the actions of the destroyers and cruisers, which were based for Force K, which was based often in Malta, as often as it could be supplied and kept up there, and the aircraft based there. All these things act in concert together. In concert, they provide for what takes place. And when I say in concert together, I mean they're all operating the same way. Unfortunately, there isn't really always the best linking up between the aircraft and the submarines and the destroyers, and it does cause fun. It's mainly because you have two things going on in World War II. You have a mass mobilization, and you have a whole load of new technologies that have evolved dramatically since they were conceived in World War I or the interwar years, and it's getting them used to working together and working out what the realities of them working together is. This is a very different scenario. And it's something which is very easy to overlook, but it's very much a reality of it. The scenario of what you're facing. But they managed to pull a lot off. They managed to work together enough to get the work it done. And as time went on, they got a lot better to it. They developed the systems. And then, of course, you have the demobilization post-Second World War, and you promptly lose a lot of that institutional memory. But that is for another time, another video. Let's see. Where else can you find me? This is hopefully... It is not going to be a 50-minute one. This is going to be about a 40-minute one. 45 minutes. So, Tuesday the 28th of July, making Mare Nostrum Hollow Jest. Well, you've now had two videos. This is the second video, part 2. Originally, it was one 40-minute video. Then it was 2 attempted recordings, which were both about an hour long, and now it's become 2 probably best part of 110 minutes in total length, nearly 2 hours videos, because there's one 52 minutes and this one's going to be well into the 40s. So saying it's going to be roughly 110 minutes worth of videos, nearly 2 hours is not too much. And it's the pre-tribals. That's going to be cool. That is going to be cool, pre-tribals. I like them. What else have we got coming up in August? Because this is the second to last video of July. Think about when this all started. And this is the second last video of July. We have got the Little Boat Wars. The Little Boat Wars. And the outcome of the Spanish Armada. Strategy, technology, tactics, or luck. Because I am a naval historian and I do more than just the modern period. Especially when I'm teaching it. And frankly, I felt like breaking out of the modern period and going full past. Hence the Battle of Cape Passaro, HMS Emerald and Enterprise. You know, I've done the C's, I've done the D's. It's time to do the E's, okay? The E's have been crying out for it, and I have been listening to that crying for as long as I can, but Emerald and Enterprise, do not worry, I am going to do a video about you now. You deserve that video. Your pleas have been noted. Ooh, right then. So, Naval History Live, August 2020, themes of Alex Clark. We have Daniel Freeman's Patreon video for What if the Tsingtao incident goes hot and World War II begins in the Pacific in early 1939? Well, for starters, the Royal Navy submarine force gets to fight the war it's been built for. Woohoo! We're coming for you! that's the first big thing. They get to fight the war they've been planning for. Could Crete have been saved in 1941? I like these counterfactual histories. I have a lot of fun with them. It's going to be an interesting one because that's already been covered today. What, you know, if part of what would happen if Crete had been saved, what the Allies could have done. If they managed to secure it, as well as potentially giving a very bloody nose to Hitler and Mussolini. The Convoy War and the Perfect Storm of PQ-17. Thursday, 27th. I've been asked so many times about Convoy Wars and PQ-17 that, frankly, it seemed about time I did something. Monday the 31st, Patreon video. Courtesy of Berlinura, Mediterranean gunboat diplomacy in the Victorian era, Constantinople and Alexandria. That's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to that. I am. Going to be pretty darn cool. Where else to find me? Twitter. Bilge pumps is going to be mentioned a lot in the coming few days on Twitter because, frankly, that's going to become... That's also today's thing recording. It's so long, it's going to become a double two-parter. There's no way of doing it. It is that long. It's going to be two 90-minute ones. I've listened to it through. It's excellent. I'm really excited by it. But it's going to be two. And then we got Patreon, which for the princely sum of £3 a month, you get access to my slides. And you get to vote, most importantly. You get to suggest what topics for the Patreon videos, and then you get to vote on the ones I select I can actually do. Hopefully never again, because of the amount of effort it's taken to organise and do, because the ones I normally pick myself, I can have already got the books in stock for. Sometimes the ones that just suggest in the Patreon, I go, oh, I could do that, I like that. I think I have the books in. And then I go, look good and go, oh, hang on, I ain't got that book. And that's quite a big book written by a major author on this. Oh, I'd better buy that in. But there again, that's where the £3 a month you donate or whatever you kindly choose to donate goes on. That goes on by purchasing the books. Thank you very much to everyone who does that. And Global Maritime History, where you can find a whole load of articles written by me. And there are going to be more joining it soon. It's just, I've been writing the book. Between doing the book and doing some other things, you know, the amount of time to write little articles shrinks down. I've done some for Warships International Fleet Review, which is a lovely magazine. I do enjoy that magazine, and I enjoy writing for them. Ian Ballantyne's a very cool guy, and he's done some great history books. Track down his books. He does some great history stuff. And, I said, Global Maritime History. It's lovely. So, I'm going to put this up, and I'm going to hopefully have it got live enough time you'll be able to have watched it before the whole live at 6 o'clock. But for that to be the case, I better get started on it quickly, because it's going to have to go live about 5:15. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Take care. Thank you. Hope to see you at the live at 6 o'clock, probably when this is literally just finishing. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. And that will make it exactly 107 minutes. So yeah, very nearly. Very, very close to the 110-minute mark. Thank you.